So, guys, welcome to another episode of Futureproof podcast. As you know, I speak with a number of well-renowned automotive executives in terms of their experience in really future-proofing their organizations from a standpoint to improve from people to results. So today I'm going to be speaking with a very well-known executive from the active, passive, and safety world. And without any further ado, I will introduce Art Blanchford, currently a Veoneer. So, Art, please introduce yourself.
Hey, thank you very much, Nathaniel. Art Blanchford here. I've been in the auto industry since 1991, and in that time, always been in the safety industry. First with TRW, and then Autoliv, and then the spin out of Autoliv the last few years, Veoneer in active safety. Currently, executive vice president for sales and business development with Veoneer. Previously running the regions for North America, China, and Korea in Veoneer, as well as product planning. And then I had some very interesting jobs and lived in a lot of interesting places in the industry. I've seen a lot of the industry, of course, spent a lot of time in Michigan because that's where a lot of the seat of the industry is, but also spent several years in Germany. Very interesting, good experience with Autoliv, and then also as president of Greater China for Autoliv too, which is also very interesting and dynamic job. I hired over 4,000 employees while I was there and built close to 100 buildings. I had a really dynamic team over there. So I've seen a lot of the industry, been in every function from operations to sales and engineering and in between. And it's been a very exciting ride. A decade ago with the meltdown, I thought I'd never see something like that again. And then we're in a situation like that again, only 10 years later. So very exciting ride, very dynamic industry, and happy to be with you here today.
Perfect. Well, let's rewind it all the way to kind of the start of getting into the industry. Why did you want to get into automotive? What was the fascination, or what was the interest?
Yeah, it's a really good question, and it's it's a passion from when I was a kid. I loved cars when I was a kid, and I can remember 1984 to 88 in that time period. I would read Motor Trend and Car and Driver every day, and I could identify every car on the road and what year it was just by its headlights at night at that time. So I was really fascinated with cars. So it was either going to be an engineer in the automotive industry, or I was going to go right for Car and Driver. Those were the two things I had in mind coming up through high school and college, and ended up in the safety industry. The town where I went to college in Cookeville, Tennessee, TRW built a big airbag plant there while I was in college. And that was my first co-op job and my entry into the safety aspect of the industry.
Okay, so tell us a little bit about the introduction then, coming into TRW. You mentioned that the safety part, if we're looking at automotive products, probably if we're looking at quality, zero defects, one of the most important parts on the vehicle, obviously saves lives. So tell us a little bit about that, the introduction to that sort of business.
Yeah, coming in there, I started as a manufacturing engineer and was fascinated by both the process, dealing with propellants and explosives, and the zero tolerance for any kind of deviation in the manufacturing process or in quality. So that was very interesting. And then I moved over into design engineering and seatbelts, right? And doing, simple DFMEAs and PFMEAs for seatbelts. But again, learning about the fact that these products, and right in that time period was a time period the US was regulating seatbelt usage and trying to catch up with Europe, and seeing what a positive impact it could make. So my fascination with cars and the industry as a whole, and then seeing the positive impact that safety could make on, as you said, saving lives, which became the tagline of Autoliv. I started with Autoliv all the way back in 95. Okay. So quite some time ago. It was a very small company in the US at the time, and then grew to over a $10 billion company in the time that I was with it. But seeing the positive impact that can have on people's lives, both through the business, because and we'll probably talk about this a little bit more later, about the positive impact business can have on lives of people that work in the business, but also hearing the stories, the personal stories of family members or customers, family members that were saved by the restraint system. Mm-hmm. Is really powerful and really motivating to the people that work in the business. And then coming to Veoneer is the next step to not just protect in an accident, but to prevent the accident as a whole with collaborative driving and active safety systems. So it's been a very rewarding journey from that perspective as well.
Okay, and obviously some individuals that we speak on here transform businesses from a manufacturing standpoint, some from sales, some from a financial standpoint. So what was it that interested you, or how did you get into the sales side of the business?
Into the sales side of the business?
Yeah.
Yeah, I think it's my natural interest in people. And so I really enjoy engaging with people. I don't enjoy sitting in an office all day doing PFMEAs, which I did for a couple of years. I really enjoyed working with the customer, serving the customer. I found early on that I was a very good problem solver. There's a lot of getting people together and seeing what the customer needs and how that could be a win-win for our organization and the customer. So early job I had in Autoliv was I was actually sitting down in Building 3 in Dearborn, Michigan, and in the Ford building,
Okay.
working with them on how to bring the right technology to solve the safety issues that Ford was dealing with as a supplier expert inside. So I really enjoyed dealing with the customers. I sometimes would joke, they say a bad day at the customer is better than a good day in the office. You just be out connecting with people and helping to solve problems. And I had a willingness to speak up, probably maybe beyond my years. And that sometimes people would be afraid to say the challenging things or to challenge the status quo. And that's also served me very well from those early days at Ford from an engineering perspective, all the way to, dealing with whole supply chain issues and financial meltdown of the industry, and speaking up around that, and getting invited onto the GM Supplier Council as well. I'm probably the youngest member ever to be on the GM Supplier Council, to help address total industry issues in a time of crisis a decade ago. So that's what I think drove me into the sales side, and I enjoyed it, and then I was good at it. I mean, it was really, when I first took over the General Motors business with Autoliv, I think we were around 400 million, and I grew it to something like 1.2 billion in a few years. So it was a really great partnership. I really have a lot of respect and a lot of friends in General Motors from that time, really working very closely together.
Okay, and for instance, from that, from growing it from into the billions, what's the key drivers behind that? Is it just great relationships, or is it just great products? Kind of, what's the go between?
I think it's both. I mean, I had a mentor, Gustav Selsing, used to always say it's product, performance, and presence. Those three things, and 10% lock. So 30, 30, 30, 10. And I think that's pretty true. But what I did specifically that really worked is I listened to the customer. What is the customer's needs? What are their goals? Where are they driving for? And then how can my company, can my product help them to attain their goals? What can I do? And so, for example, early on my time taking care of the GM business, it was clear they needed a higher quality, better performance, and they needed a stable, trusted delivery. There's a lot of supply chain issues. So I spent a lot of time, even though I was the sales guy at the time, I was head of the business unit at sales and engineering. I spent a lot of time in the plants, because that's where we needed to have the work. We need to improve our operations. As you said in the beginning, with safety products, we need to be driving to zero defect. We need to create that sense of urgency and accountability in the plants in order to be able to have a better foundation from which to sell from. And that, I think, really surprised GM, quite frankly, that the sales guy would drive that way in the plants. And there was sometime in there in the mid 2000s at the auto show, I got an award from GM for Supplier Executive of the Year, just because I hadn't seen supplier executives take that type of role, wide role, to really focus on the customer needs. And that was, it's quite interesting. So that's, I think, the main success in the customers. What does the customer really need? And then how do we drive that? And then a really, really big point that I'm quite different than a lot of folks in the industry is transparency as well.
Okay.
You have to be willing to tell the customer the things they don't want to hear when it's not popular, because it's what's necessary to be more successful, even though they don't want to hear it at the time. And eventually, over time, it really builds trust. I'll bring that into the current future situation. The supply chain is into total crunch right now because we're missing chips, right? Everybody is out of chips. And when we first started saying that in September, all the customers said, well, it's your problem, Veoneer, because you're the only one that has that problem. Well, obviously, everybody knows now today it's a problem for the whole industry. Exactly. And now those same customers saying, hey, we really appreciate you bringing that to our attention early. You were the first one in to say that was an issue. And we're sorry we beat you up about it. But now we're handling it very cleanly. We haven't shut down any customers, and we won't through this very difficult process. But that's typical of my way of dealing with the customer, which has then influenced all of Veoneer, is that we're really transparent. We bring bad news first. We bring the problems up so that we can address those. And over time, that really builds trust with the customers. And it's something I really believe in. A lot of people argue about, because it's always controversial when you have a problem and you go into the customer in the beginning. But over the 3 decades I have in this industry, I can tell you it works.
No, and that's easy to see. But in terms of that situation, if we look at the wafer shortage, the chips, etc., from a semiconductor standpoint, what's your view on that currently, and how do you think that comes back to some sort of normality? Is it just waiting for time?
Well, it's mostly waiting for time. I mean, you have a perfect storm. The way I see it right now is that with the pandemic, nobody believed the economy would bounce back so fast, specifically automotive industry. And I don't know if we would have bet on that either. 6 months ago, we didn't have to make the decision to put down, a whole bunch of wafers to start the process to be ready 6 months later. And I think some of the wafer companies, some of the foundries, they held back a little bit, understandably so, even if it wasn't what we were asking for at the time. So that's one part of it. And that on its own probably would have made it a real struggle. But on top of that, with everybody staying at home, either working from home or playing at home, gaming has taken off. PCs, desktop PCs have gone through the roof. You have 5G coming at the same time. My son's a big computer builder. He's been trying to get the latest GPUs and CPUs from NVIDIA and AMD, and it's almost impossible, right? So everybody's pulling. You got 5G coming, you got home computing and business computing pulling really hard at the same time that people didn't invest because they didn't believe the economy was coming back that quickly.
Yeah.
So it's going to be a struggle. I mean, what we're seeing now is we think it's going to be until probably Q3 until it's completely back to normal. Okay. Right now, lead times for orders have gone from about 26 weeks to 40 weeks. So we're already really focusing a lot on planning for Q3 and Q4 to make sure that things are fully stable by then. But the industry's done a great job. I mean, it's, our Q4 was much stronger than we expected, even with the crisis and the supply issues. So I think the industry as a whole has done a really good job. We'll see how it plays out in Q1 here.
Okay, and do you think from a manufacturer standpoint, from a wafer manufacturer standpoint, it's just a case of these guys have to go into overdrive in terms of production, or is that still going to be a problem due to the pandemic and the number of people, for instance, you can have in a plant, etc.?
No, I don't think that's an issue. It's just that there's a cure time of 6 months. Okay. I think from the foundries, from the wafers, I think there's probably enough capacity. I'm not the expert here, but I think there's probably enough capacity, but it takes a long time to fill those up. There wasn't enough back-end capacity to finish up the chips. That's being invested right now, and that'll come a little bit faster. But because of this big backlog, and there will be some more investment, but foundries are very expensive, and people know this is a little bit of a bubble right now too. So I think during this year of 21, I think you're just going to see longer lead times until things normal out, probably in the end of Q2, Q3 timeframe this year.
Okay, and if we jump back into obviously the GM, the building that to a $1.2 billion business, and then moving into the president role, the general management role, responsible for active safety. Give us some insight into that, because now not only responsible for sales, but responsible for a lot more.
Yeah, I mean, and that was a very interesting job, and it was a very small business at the time. If I remember correctly, our business in active safety at the time was 60 million. Last year Veoneer was 2 billion, which was about the same, the spin out of that small 60 million business. So that time was really about trying to judge where the market was going. So we had a radar business that we had bought from Tyco. We had a very small vision business and a night vision business starting up, and we were also cooperating with Mobileye back then. And then, we saw things at that time, really saw some strong interest in stereo vision, and our customers wanting us to do stereo vision, which is, let's say, mechanically better. Physically, it's a better system because you can get depth perception, and the leading customers in the world are wanting to go that way. And so we decided to develop that, which Mobileye didn't want to develop, which led to our breakup with Mobileye, which, 10 years on, it's interesting to see, or 12 years on now, the cooperation we have with Qualcomm, setting up this cooperation with Qualcomm to really be, the main challenger in the space with vision is coming from decisions that were made 10 years ago, and then a decade or a decade and a half of effort to be the other vision supplier, if you will. And so we have many customers in the vision space today, both stereo vision and monovision. And then most recently announced in August, this cooperation with Qualcomm, which is very exciting, which will have a whole ecosystem, SoC with the Qualcomm Snapdragon and Veoneer algorithms and drive policy available for both tier ones as well as OEMs.
Okay. And in that role, then, something that would have been new to you, you're saying being responsible for the whole business. What were the challenges you faced kind of stepping into that role?
Well, it's interesting because, I think almost all the challenges are always people. Yeah. Both the good and the bad comes from the people, right? And that's the challenges. I thought at that time, because I hadn't officially had an operations role before that the operations would have been a challenge, but it turns out that it wasn't so much because I spent so much time in the plants, even in sales roles in the past. But I think the main challenge I had coming into the active safety role back then is at that time, active safety technologies were primarily military technologies, right? It's radars and GPS and vision, and the thought process of some of the people that came with the acquisitions was much more military. It has to be cutting edge technology, but doesn't really matter too much if it works 100% of the time. Delivery, and that can, I can remember getting a call on a Friday afternoon from one of my plant managers when I first had that active safety job 10 years ago saying, oh, we're working on this, we're working on that. And oh, by the way, we're going to shut down Daimler on Monday. And I said, whoa. Did you just say we're going to shut down a customer? Because that's words we don't say in Autoliv, period. You don't say that. You don't even consider that. You just find a way. He said, oh yeah, but we had this issue and we're not going to be able to make the deliveries. I said, no. Let's who do we need to get on the phone to get to how we're going to keep Daimler running?
Yeah.
And that, to change that mindset. And in general, that's what I've pushed with. That was one thing coming in from active safety, I think, to really push on that. And then the other was to also, in that role, actually another big challenge was the sales, because we had a sales team in Automotive that was really strong with this basis in airbags and safety electronics, and to convince them that we should also sell active safety, that they could ruin the reputation because of these new military and they guys don't understand automotive. So as usual, it's getting people together, setting a clear vision, understanding the culture that we want to create, customer focused, and driving in that direction.
Okay. And obviously, as you mentioned, it's a whole new area to step into. So how hard was it to get the people on side to be able to think in this new manner?
I mean, I think it varies on the people, and of course also my own effectiveness, but I think it's amazing what you can do if you get people together and you're willing to have, as Brene Brown says, the wholehearted conversations, where you really put the things on the table. My word for that is, I say, caring enough to be honest, right? To not be so worried about my own comfort that I'm not willing to say the difficult thing to somebody that needs to change, right? And the same thing coming back to me to solicit that feedback. So to really have these real, open, wholehearted, vulnerable conversations, say, hey, here's where I think we need to go. What do you think? What do we need to change? Are you willing to come along with this new culture? Or do we need to find another place for you? How does that look like? Are we going in the right direction? What do you think? And to have those tough conversations, those wholehearted conversations, those caring enough to be honest conversations, really a lot of things come through quickly with that. And most people come along for the ride. They want to be part of this, and really willing to learn and have a good time. And some people say, it's not for me, and then I'll find something else to do, and that's okay too.
And then from there, Art, you went on to obviously the responsibility over China. Then you mentioned earlier in the conversation employing over 4,000 employees. So what was the challenges you faced there, and how did they differ to what you'd faced before?
Yeah, I had one interesting spot in between there where I took over the operations in North America for General Motors specifically, because we were having some serious quality issues after I had left the GM, and I took over 7 plants in North America to fix the General Motors business. And there is where, as my China team told me later, that's where I got my PhD in manufacturing. I spent a lot of time in Mexico and in our plants in US and Canada. And I think the key there for me is 2 things. One is being curious. Like I'm willing to go in as a learner, and I really went into the plants, even though I knew a fair amount about operations already. I really was curious. Okay, what happens next? When we have this issue, what happens? Where does the part go? Spending time really on the floor, really with the people. And the second thing, especially in that situation where I was having to push people really hard because we urgently needed to make a change, we needed to make a turnaround urgently, is what I call as a personal management interview that I would do with each of my plant managers every month, where I'd sit down one-on-one. And this is something I learned from a professor at University of Michigan while I was getting my MBA there. But this personal management interview is not focused on the KPIs, but it's focused on how we relate to each other. Right? So I'm asking questions like, really, how are you? How are you doing? What are personal things going on that might be affecting work? How am I as a leader? What's working well for you? From my perspective, what's not working well? What should I continue? What should I stop doing? Right? And so we really have this type of interaction on a very personal level. How can we be more effective working together? So we're talking about the mortar, not the bricks. We spend a lot of time on the bricks, right? But what's the oil in the gears that keeps it moving? And I think this is absolutely key in a high pressure environment like operations, where it's always go, 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 and you feel like it's 24/7 on the clock, to carve out time at least once a month to sit down and have this personal conversation with each of my direct reports. One of those plant managers is now a VP in the industry, and really, really good guy. And he said, the only thing that kept me thinking you were an okay guy was that PMI.
Okay.
Because you were pushing so hard and really demanding that we'd turn this thing around so quickly. But that let me see that, we could connect as human beings, and made me want to fight harder for you instead of against you. So I think that was key. So that job gave me a lot of training, so that when I landed, that was a turnaround job I did only for about 10 months or a year, until we got back on good standing with General Motors and got the operations fixed and the designs fixed. It was a very, very intense three-prong approach to get that fixed, but we did. And so when I landed in China some months later, I felt much more confident running a company that grew up to 14 factories,
Okay.
several major campuses, and I think went from about 6,000 to close to 10,000 employees while I was there, and invested a few $100 million in capex and campuses and buildings, and was really a lot of fun. But that gave me a good start with that experience that I had turning around the operations in North America before I came into China.
Okay, and obviously a huge thing for you in any transformation, I can tell already, is people. The people are part of the challenge. But when we look at now going from the US into China, hugely different culture, different way of living, different way of working. So how did you adapt to that and to be able to build the business to what you got it to?
Yeah, it's really interesting. And I mean, I had lived in Germany before, so I was a little bit, but that's still a Western culture. It's still a little bit different, but a Western culture. And, you know, I had some senior businessmen in China tell me at the time, hey, you're coming into China. It's different. You know, this guy was a leader, a Chinese, ethnic Han living in China for a long time, and saying, hey, you got to do it differently. Here, you can't be friends with people. They're different. You have to really respect the hierarchy. You can never, for example, demote somebody. They'll quit because they'll lose face. It's, you know, China's very different, and you need to respect that. And it's a different sense of fairness and what's okay and what's not okay. And on one hand, he's right. And I tried to follow that for a couple of months. But on the bigger sense, actually, he's wrong. Because what makes us different is that 10 or 20%. You know, we look different. We have a little bit different code of ethics, and, you know, as far as what's fair and what's not fair. But what makes us the same, the 90% of human beingness, is still the same. So what I found there is, coming back to like the PMIs, to connect on people on a human basis, to really understand them, to respect them, to listen to them. Right. So I mean, there we, you know, had a team that was mixed. It was about, my direct reports were about half expats and half Chinese.
Okay.
Great team. Loved working there. Still close friends with a lot of the team that I work with in China. But we set a clear vision. We got the team together, and we even adjusted the team. And I even had some older Chinese men who were, you know, these ones that you supposedly can't demote or anything, even took them off my team and still stayed in the organization, doing really well, supporting, running their job with excellence at a different level because of that human connection created through that PMI. I clearly showed respect, listened to the people. And then there's some people too that, you know, when we got clear about our core values that we had in this management team, it's clear that there were some other people that didn't share those core values. Yeah. You know, there's 2 or 3, and I got the team so strong there, and it was such a joy that we would have this team building process at the end of our quarterly team meetings, where we would clear the room and sit in a circle with no chairs or, you know, no tables or anything in between, and each person would talk about what they see as their main role in the team, and everybody would give them feedback on what's working well and what they need to do better. So they call it a hot seat process, but it's really, you know, again, wholehearted conversation, really open. And in those conversations, we had such a high level of trust that other members of the team could really challenge another member of the team and say, hey, it seems like you don't have the same alignment. We're all in the water going this way, and you're swimming that way. Why is that? And not like berating, not picking on somebody, just open, honest conversation. And eventually that guy said, yeah, you know, I just see things very differently, and I don't share some of the fundamental values of the rest of the team. So I coached with him for a couple months, and then eventually became clear he needed to go work somewhere else. So I helped him find a job somewhere else, and he asked me to be a coach at him in his new job even.
Okay.
You know, so I do it in the right way, but he didn't line up and fit the values of that team. And we needed to all have the same values to be able to work well together. But that's the sort of magic place that you can get to if you really have true teamwork. And out of that teamwork, you can create fabulous results. I mean, we had the #1 quality in the organization, #1 profitability in the organization. I had OEMs coming to me and my team asking them how to set up quality systems in China when they come to put their plants in China.
Okay.
Because of the great quality reputation that we had running there. And I think that was really great. It was during that time too that I took on another really key lesson in business. It was so busy. We were putting in a whole level of vertical integration. I was running a couple of the VP jobs myself, and I realized this Patrick Lencioni, his book The Advantage, where he talks about what is the one thing that's most important to focus on right now. We have our normal KPIs, of course, but there's always one thing and that really helped us tremendously to focus. Okay, right now for this quarter, what is the #1 thing for the whole company, that anytime that one thing comes across the desks of any of the executives, it has to have the top priority, whether it's in your area or not. And that helped tremendously to get laser-like focus on some of the big issues we had with huge transitions of bringing production in for, 2 or 3, the supply chain, the vertical integration, bringing that in from the West when we needed to have higher volume in China. Several times we had very different types of main focuses, but that helped us to execute these big waves of change coming through the business in a much more successful manner by being very clear and over communicating. Right now, this quarter, this is the one thing, and then next quarter we'll look at it again, and maybe it's the same, maybe it changes. But that also was very, very useful while we were running China. So that was a lot of fun. And maybe one of the things I'm most proud of there is that the lady running Autoliv China now is Jennifer Chung, and she's one of the highest ranked females I've seen in Asia run a business, and she's doing a fantastic job, and love her to pieces. She grew up on my team, and I couldn't convince her to take the job, but after the guy that I hired couldn't do it well, she stepped in and is doing a fantastic job in the 6 years that I haven't been there. So that's really great to see, and I still visit her when I'm over there.
Okay, and on that note, obviously, as you mentioned, hierarchy within China. Also, diversity is something in some businesses where it's seen as very male-dominated. So how difficult do you think that would have been for her to settle in within that role? Or do you think it would have been looked down on by others? What's your viewpoint on that?
It's interesting. Unlike the rest of Asia, in China, being female is, it's okay to be a strong business leader female. And I think like when we would talk about the leadership, I mean, maybe it's different in the west of China or rural China, but in Shanghai and in the business area, it's not that it's, as easy maybe as being a man, but I had lots of strong females on my team that were great. And when I look at like the global leadership program that we would send executives to every year internally to develop, I made that one of my missions, that I would always be one of the ones sending somebody that's not of the cut of the rest of the company.
Yeah.
And so I would almost always had a female coming from China, at least a local Chinese growing up in that, but also more than likely a female. And there's still several executives on that team, head of sales, head of HR, and the president of the CEO of the Greater China region, who are females on that team today. And that's something that I prided myself in and worked so well with, and where I really got to see, people talk about diversity and inclusion, but and most and the better people that talk about that, like the ones that understand the most, it's not just about skin color or gender. Yeah. It's about diversity of thought as well, right? And of course, it helps to ensure you have diversity of thought by having diversity in sort of physical markers as well. But I really enjoyed having people around me that were very different than I am. I'm visionary and forward thinking, and not always finishing the stuff up behind myself as I go. I had this, and she's still there today, but this great HR partner when I was in China. I would think something, I'd have a little brainstorm about it, and she would execute it. She's a completely different personality than me. Yeah. I probably made her crazy a lot, but we were wonderful partners because we were so different. She had such a different thought process than I did. It was really a great partnership, a great teamwork.
Oh, great. And then obviously, if we come to the present now, being involved in a huge spin-off, and now stepping into the EVP, representing the sales side of the organization, give us a little insight into that and how interesting that spin-off was and the challenges you faced.
Yeah, so that's been really interesting. I mean, of course, it was super exciting in the beginning, as it is with any spinoff, and getting to be present when we were ringing the bell on the New York Stock Exchange was really cool. Definitely a highlight. I think the thing that we all underestimated in the whole industry around autonomous driving and active safety is how fast the industry moves.
Yep.
I mean, it has moved so fast since we launched Veoneer, and things have changed a lot. All level 4 driving. Everybody was promising we'd all be in fully autonomous cars by now, and there's not any really today. And that's still going to come, but it's going to come at a much slower pace. And that's why in Veoneer we've adapted to, looking at the collaborative driving instead. But the industry, the mix of automotive and tech, which is where the value creation stuff is today, but it's also a completely different animal. I mean, automotive is, everything is being developed in series, right? In tech, everything is agile and being developed in parallel, right? And very short loops. So I had a comment on my LinkedIn recently from an executive at GM that said, "Hey, congratulations on your anniversary in this position. 1 year in tech automotive is like 5 years in just automotive." And it is a little bit like that. I mean, it's super intense. The opportunities, like in Autoliv, we were used to, and I was used to, doing everything right. You understand everything, you can see the market, you have some volatility, you do everything right. Here, there's so much more volatility. The market's so much more changes. There's a lot more opportunities to make mistakes because things are so much more variable in the tech side of the space, and it's moving so fast. So it's been very exciting. It's been very intense, redoing business plans a lot during this time, traveling way too much, quite frankly. You know, when I was running Korea, China, North America, and the headquarters in Stockholm all at the same time. So it's been very, very interesting. And quite frankly, I think this year, 2020, it's been nice to be dialed back to only sales and business development, getting this Qualcomm deal put together, and trying to get that final agreement finalized right now. And it's a little bit more strategic focus than just running all the operations, as well as sales and engineering, as I was doing in the interim period with Veoneer. So it's been very interesting. Being COVID's also been very interesting. I mean, I get a lot of energy from being with the people, and not being with the people this year has been tough from a work side. I have to say, it's been wonderful from a personal side, because I've been with the people most important to me, which are my 3 kids and my wife and 4 furries at home, so that part's been great. But the business is definitely, we've been much more effective than we thought we could be virtually or over Zoom and Teams. But it has still been a lot tougher, and not getting the energy from being together with the people in the way that I'm used to doing.
And even see from a customer standpoint, then obviously everything's been virtual now, whereas prior it had been going, for instance, the GM having meetings face to face in a boardroom. How different is it having these conversations via Zoom or Teams rather than in face to face now, or is it pretty much similar?
Yeah, I mean, I think again, it's more effective than we thought it would be, but it's still not near as effective as being together face to face, because there's just a human aspect of, walking in the hall together and, hey, how you doing? One-on-one conversations, and how are the kids, and how are you feeling? That aren't happening. And again, that's sort of coming back to what I talked about with this personal management interview. This is the oil in the gears. So the gears are still running, but it's not quite as effective. It's not quite as smooth. I think, especially in my experience, especially in Asia. I mean, China, we're still having the face-to-face meetings. China's running business pretty much as normal. I'm not, because I can't come in the country, but my team there. But when I think about the communication, for example, in Korea, that was my last big customer meeting before face-to-face, right before things shut down. Being over there in HKMC, and I think not having those face-to-face meetings, especially in very high context cultures like Asia, especially Japan and Korea, it's a lot tougher. The high content cultures, like Germany and US, somewhere in the middle, maybe it's a little bit easier to do on video. But we've all been a lot more effective than we thought was possible, and it will change the way we do things, which I think is right. And it's still not as effective as being able to have meaningful personal human interactions.
Yeah.
I mean, I really miss I say sorry, silly things, but things that I really enjoyed, like Supplier of the Year parties with GM. It's a lot of great time to really connect with a lot of friends in the industry, and just celebrate. And, in automotive industry, we drive each other really, really hard. It's a really tough industry, and having those type of face-to-face times where you can connect on a human base and relax a little bit, I do miss those for sure this year.
Okay, and what's your viewpoint on now the OEM situation? For instance, you've got companies such as GM, who you know very well, that are going to be looking into areas of flying cars, electric vehicles. You've got now companies such as Lucid Motors, Tesla's bringing electric vehicles to markets, NIO with their battery changes. How do you see the shift being within the industry now, from obviously you've been involved in it from back then when it was the traditional diesel engines, for instance, all the way to now? What's your viewpoint?
Yeah, I mean, it's going through the biggest transformation since the automotive industry started. Transportation is going through the biggest transformation since horses and walking to automobiles, and now is going through again from IC engines and driven automobiles to electrical, autonomous, and I think you can see it too. I mean, the markets as a whole, with I think the overvaluation on some of the electric startups, as well as some of the technology companies, especially ones that have come in with SPACs recently, getting fantastic valuations. I mean, when Tesla's worth more than all the other car companies put together, they clearly have a great product and great marketing. But even, NIO, you mentioned some of these others with these incredible valuations right now. It's showing where the interest is and where people want to put their attention right now. And I think, GM with their, vision of zero fatalities, zero emissions, right? I mean, this is really, and fully autonomous fleet, this is really a a transformation. And you see just last night, you see the big investment of Microsoft in Cruise, which is owned by General Motors. So Cruise's valuation now is 30 billion.
Okay.
GM bought it for a little over $1 billion in 2016. It's 30 billion today, which makes up 40% of GM's market cap. So the Cruise automation is making up 40% of the value. And then GM stock jumped recently too when they announced this new, completely zero emissions logistics platform. So electric logistics platform and transportation business. So I think Mary Barra has done a wonderful job of keeping the old running well while she's embracing the new. And again, same thing as I said, setting the vision, getting the best of the people, and really, in the way she runs the company there. But I think it's a huge transformation for the whole industry. I think the thing that's really encouraging is that, the big old companies, I'll say GM, Volkswagen, Toyota, they all recognize it and they're all driving for it. Volkswagen say, I'm gonna be a software company. GM, we're gonna be a transportation and an electric company. So I think it's coming in the right direction. Of course, things will balance out. There's tons of LiDAR companies out there right now with fantastic valuations. Technology is moving very fast. Eventually things will shift out, and I think you'll see line up in a little bit more systematic way than they are today. But the winners are clearly ones that are finding ways to integrate the new with the old, or just the new, and those ones will probably consolidate out some over time as well. But definitely, I was reading John McElroy, a long-term reporter on the industry, recently was saying, someone was asking him how much longer he's going to stay in the industry, because he's been in the industry for a long time, 40 years. And he said, are you kidding me, to leave at the biggest transformation time in the whole industry? I mean, this is super exciting, and it is. And the industry is very dynamic right now. That's for sure. Catching the attention of everybody on the planet right now, when it was something 10 years ago was to be shunned, the automotive industry. And today it's back.
And then talking of kind of, as you said, level 4 autonomy, etc., how long do you think it will be until we see this regularly? I know from our standpoint, we've been seeing kind of tests in the Bay Area, for instance, from companies from Google to Domino's to all sorts that we've been seeing. So where do you see it going, and how long do you think it will be until we have that autonomy and these cars on the road?
Yeah, I mean, that's a really good question. And I think that you'll start to see autonomy in very small ODDs, operational design domains. So you'll start to see autonomy in neighborhoods, autonomous, I'll call them robots or delivery vehicles. You'll start to see shuttles at the Olympics or at the World Cup, or shuttles, maybe delivering groceries in a very specific neighborhood, right? So in a very limited ODD at lower speeds, I think you'll see quite a bit of autonomous driving. My personal opinion, the first sort of massive scale I think that you'll see is another specific ODD that I feel like that commercial transportation, that you could get trucks that could train on the interstates, in one lane, and drivers could sleep while the truck drives at night, and then they can get up and take it into the city in the morning. So in these limited specific ODDs, especially if it's at lower speed or very contained, like a interstate, I think you will start to see autonomous, and you're seeing it coming. I mean, you're seeing full driverless in Arizona now with Google and a few other places. But to have a car that really can handle any situation at any time in a price point that a consumer is going to buy it, I think it's still quite a ways away. So I think that's why you see Veoneer focus on the collaborative driving, which we still think is going to be the high volume, at least through 2030, the high volume of cars, if you think about, all the road accidents kill 1.3, 1.4 million people per year, right? And most of those are caused by some sort of driver error.
Yeah.
So if you can I think personally, one simple thing, driver monitoring systems to monitor the distraction of the driver, make sure the driver's eyes are on the road and what's going on around them. Help the collaborative driving that we've showed at CES only 1 year ago, seems like a century ago now, but only 1 year ago, right? If you can eliminate the driver distraction and help the driver to pay more attention to what's important, what's going on around them, and what's not important, and sensors around the car can really help with that, you could eliminate most of that without near the cost of going to fully autonomous. So autonomous will come eventually, but I think it will come in those sort of step manners, and it's going to be a long time probably, Nathaniel, before you or I are buying a fully autonomous car.
No, exactly. And then the other thing, obviously, on top of autonomous driving, we have the debate of electric, hydrogen, hybrid. So what's your view on that?
I mean, electric's coming, right? I mean, you see all the rulings in the European countries, right? A lot of them wanting to mandate fully electric cars and only electric cars. California, now with the Biden administration, I think you're going to see subsidies in the US. coming up again for electric vehicles, and they're fun to drive. I mean, the the joy that I get when I punch the accelerator on a fully electric vehicle with that instant response, that instant feedback, it's quite fun. So it's not just for, I mean, Teslas are, a lot of people buy them because they think they're environmentally responsible, but most people that have a Tesla are really passionate about it and really fun to drive.
Yeah.
And when you see, Porsche labeling their fast electrics turbos, or Mustangs labeling them GTs with the fast electrics, I mean, people are buying these cars because they're fun and environmentally responsible. So I think electric is here to stay, and it's coming, and it's taken a lot, like autonomous, it's taken a lot longer to get here than we think. But I think it's, with the vehicles that are coming now, I think you'll see electric be mainstream. I mean, look at the Hummer. I mean, that's a ridiculous truck. I mean, it's fantastic, right? I mean, I have both of my sons, one's 20 and one's 17 now. Both of them sent me texts independent within 10 minutes of each other when that truck was released, saying, "Dad, you got to buy one of these." And and one of them's very into cars. One of them doesn't care anything about cars, but that's such a cool vehicle, and it's fully electric, right? So I think you're going to see electric ramp up very quickly in the next 5 to 10 years.
Okay.
And that's going to be the predominant drivetrain going forward.
Yeah. And in terms of batteries, obviously the battery to power a Hummer is going to be a lot bigger than the battery to power the Mustang, for instance. So do you think it will be a case of the EV side won't fully kick off until we have the aspect to be able to charge these batteries, or similar to Tesla and Neo, battery changing stations? Did you think that will be when electric vehicles really do hit the streets, when you can really focus on the charge and it being a shorter amount of time?
Yeah, I mean, I think yes, and that's coming pretty quickly. I mean, I've been looking at like I've got money down on a Mustang Mach-E GT, right, and waiting for that to be ready. But looking at the charging stations that Ford has, that Tesla has, people will feel still this range anxiety. But the reality is, for the way that I would like to take a road trip today, I could already today take my electric car across the country. Now, if I wanted to just drive straight through 15 hours, no. But if I want to drive 3 or 4 hours, stop for lunch, drive another 3 or 4 hours, stop for dinner, drive another couple hours, stop for the night, that's no problem to do today already with electric vehicles. So I think there's a lot of work to be fleshed out there, but I think it's electric cars are going to become more and more mainstream, and people are going to be less worried about range anxiety. I mean, I think about the way that I drive today, during COVID time, I really wish I had an electric car. Yeah. Because I find myself sometimes having to go out to get gas because I'm just never going by an interstate or going by a gas station, right? And if I had an electric car, I would obviously never have to do that, right? So I think there'll be more and more, and with the new commuting patterns with COVID too, I think you'll see people being more comfortable with having an electric car, and I think they'll come pretty quickly now.
Okay, and obviously I know we touched on it earlier in the conversation, but the whole COVID situation, the pandemic, obviously we're a year in now, should we say, basically, of living with the pandemic, trying to adjust to it. How do you see the industry moving forward now? Is it something where the certainty's back and we continue to kick on, or do you think there'll be stages where it can become blurred again?
I mean, it's a good question, and nobody knows for sure, but I think that, as we talked about earlier, there's going to be supply chain hiccups now, residue from the things we talked about earlier in this interview for the next 6 months. I think there's still risk that we could have I think it's lowering by the day, but I think there's still risk that we could have automotive plant shutdowns because of COVID, and that can be very disruptive to a supply chain that's already tight, via parts that are allocated to one plant and in the pipeline and in the form that's made for the cars in that plant. If that plant shuts down and someone else wants to ramp something else up to cover it, it doesn't necessarily fit together. I think that the reason I said that, I think that risk is declining because we've made it this far into a sort of big second wave in Europe and US without a plant being shut down. So I feel like we maybe have managed, and we have the safety protocols in place. I know in our own plants, we feel like we've done really well. We haven't had any spread at all inside of any of our own plants. So I think that's coming down. I think the development aspect and how we work together with the OEMs, I think that's not going to change dramatically. I mean, I already have, several big OEMs saying we're not going to be back in the office until June or July or September. Okay. Right. So I think that's not going to change right away. But besides the supply chain disruptions and then what might happen with economies, I mean, consumer sentiment could turn and then the automotive industry could slow down a lot. But I don't see specific other big COVID risks on the horizon right now. Of course, if there's something that really, the vaccine doesn't work as well and people lose confidence in the economy, of course, that would have a major effect on on automotive. I think also if, obviously, with the big purchases, if inflation kicks in and interest rates come back up, I think we're a long ways away from that. But with all this amount of stimulus going into the economies from all the governments around the world right now, that is something that could affect it in the longer term in the next year or two as well. But right now, it's a much better situation than any of us thought it would be, 9 months ago.
Okay. And then if we touch back to obviously your time within Veoneer now to the current date, what challenges do you see that lie ahead for you guys during this period?
I mean, I think that we're right in the middle of a big launch period. Mm-hmm. So we have a lot, so just think about the things you just talked about, right? So we have incredibly volatile market because of crash for COVID and now much stronger demand coming through Q4. So we have supply chain issues and a lot of launches at the mm-hmm. same time. So that's a big challenge, or multiple challenges that we're working through right now. Mm-hmm. And I think overall we're doing pretty well there. And then I think also, how, bringing, as the market is shifting, I mentioned LiDAR and, vision and radars and compute platform strategies. I mean, the market is moving very quickly. So to make sure that we have the technology that can work for the most amount of customers, we probably won't be able to have it that works for all customers because there's different strategies, but that we have the right technology available in the right timing and the right performance for the most customers, and picking those ones is a lot trickier than it was in airbags and seatbelts, I can tell you. And that's, I think, going to be one of our big challenges. Of course, we're still driving, toward getting break even. We've been making these huge investments in technology, and I think that's actually going pretty well. But I think continuing to improve, we call it our market adjustment initiatives, like really, since COVID hit in, how do we manage our costs? I think that's going very well. Choosing the right technologies and making sure we're addressing the biggest amount of, we're getting the most possible sales and technology for the engineering effort, to be blunt. That's what it is, because the engineering is so high mm-hmm. in this industry. And because it's evolving very quickly, there's fairly big risk and reward on those. And that's why you see these very divergent valuations of the tech companies coming up. You see Luminar recently with this huge valuation, mm-hmm. but there's new LiDAR companies coming with new technologies already right now, even newer than Luminar's, right? So those are the challenges that I think that we'll be facing, and getting a good cooperation running with Qualcomm, which we already have, but getting that launched and getting our first orders there. These are the challenges that we have coming up, on top of the supply chain and launch issues that we're dealing with every day.
And so with these problems that overcome, and then there's challenges that are set out, how do you focus on, or what are the most important things for you during these periods of transformation? If you could number them, what would be the most important aspects to a successful transformation?
Yeah, I mean, I think the most important thing right now, and you'll hear our CEO talk about this a lot too, is the health and well-being of our employees. Yep. And I think a lot of companies are dealing with that right now, not just from a physical health of the pandemic, but a mental health and burnout. And, these lines where it's, everybody's working from home, that's great, except now you never know when you're working and when you're not working. You're just sort of working 24/7. So I think it's always the team. As I told you at the onset, for me specifically, it's always the team. But I think most important right now is the health and well-being of the workforce, and then the engagement in the teamwork. Like, how do you keep the teamwork? How do you keep that great collaboration? Because it's one thing to sort of, drive the normal KPIs and run the machine virtually, but to wrestle with the direction of the machine. Yeah. What direction should it be going? And as I just said, with these challenges laying in front of us, to really, to work as a team over Zoom or over Teams is more challenging. But I think to have the full, so first the health and well-being of the team, and then I think the next thing is the engagement of the team, to really keep people fully engaged and really working well together. And this is where I talked about before, having these personal management interviews where we're really having good one-on-one discussions, really bringing the team together, listening well to each other, and then making joint decisions, I think is a real key to, especially when, as I mentioned before, that the market's much more volatile. So the probability of making wrong decisions is higher. Yeah. Then it's more important that you have more diversity of thought in the decision-making process, because through that you have a better chance to make better decisions than if it's somebody making those on their own.
Okay, and obviously the importance of people within any transformation, you've made that clear. But from a leader capability, what does it take to be a strong leader, and what does it take to be able to lead a business through change or through transformation?
Yeah, I mean, I think the first thing is getting a clear vision of where you want to go.
Mm-hmm.
Right? If you're in the middle of a storm and you don't know which direction you want to go, it's very easy to lose your bearings.
Yeah.
Right. So the first step is to be very clear. And that's also a team building process, because it's the leader can have some ideas, but it needs to be supported, brought in by other team members, and at least everybody bought in, even if they're not in full agreement, at least they have full commitment, right, to the vision. So the first thing is to be very clear about the vision of where it is that you want to go. And then from that, then it's about what are the activities. We measure in the automotive industry, especially, we measure a ton in the rearview mirror.
Yeah.
Right. We measure KPIs all the time, but all of the KPIs, almost all the KPIs, are rearview mirror some way or another. There's something that's already happened. So then once the vision is clear, what are the activities? What are the most important activities that are going to drive us toward that vision? And then to start measuring the activities that will later create the result. Okay. And to keep people focused on that. And then make sure you keep the engagement through PMIs, through regular team meetings, through regular follow-up on both, the rear view mirror as well as the windshield, right? What are measuring, having KPIs that aren't just historical, but what are the activities? How are we doing on the activities that we know are going to create the results that we want to get to? And then keeping people focused on that. And then also keeping people's mindset on the good. There's old discussion about the glass half full or glass half empty, right? And that's a challenge for the leader first, but then also for, to keep focused on the glass half full. I can remember being in when I was working a lot in Mexico. I mentioned I was working a lot in Mexico, and I can remember being in a hotel in a small town in central Mexico while I was running operations there, and feeling discouraged because it was tough. I was heavy sledding at the time, and I looked out my window out of the hotel, and if I looked at the lower half of my field of view, it was a junkyard. There were some really scrappy dogs and a bunch of rusted out cars and really depressing sort of view. Mm-hmm. If I looked out the top half of my field of view, there was a beautiful university lawn a little bit past that, and this gorgeous sunset over the mountains. So it's not that, they're both true. They're both there. Which one am I going to focus on?
No, exactly.
Right?
No,
so I think to keep focused on the glass being half full, or keep focused on the beautiful view that we have, and keep trying to drive toward that, and not getting weighed down by all the challenges, which are many right now.
And in terms of your career, it's been very successful thus far. Obviously, you're nowhere near done yet. I know that. But have you achieved everything you've set out to so far, or?
I think that's a really good question. And my thoughts of what makes a good career have changed a lot in the last 10 years. Mm-hmm. And I think what I would really like to accomplish in the, 20 years I have left, or 25 years I have left in adding value professionally, is to really see how I can add value to people more. What can I do to build up other people, to build up future leaders, to help companies to grow in ways that I think are conscious capitalism, mm-hmm. to really contribute to that movement of people first, right? I also have this saying that I like in business a lot, that's happy employees mm-hmm. makes happy customers, makes happy shareholders. Right. And it's not Pollyanna, it's not being willing to take the tough discussions, but having the real discussions, the real heartfelt discussions, and then getting people in a roles where they feel super productive and really motivated, mm-hmm. which they also feel good about. Even it's challenging. I mean, people like challenges. I mean, why do we do marathons and triathlons and stuff like that? It's because we like challenges, right? Why do we do sport? We want to push ourselves, but we want to feel good about it. We want to be able to keep the score. We want to be able to see what happens. And then out of that, if we keep that focus on the customer, these happy employees will take care of the customers, which pay the bills, right? Mm-hmm. And then you take care of happy shareholders. So I'd love to be able to influence more than just in the area where I'm leading a team. Yeah. This aspect of business as a whole, and that I think would be really, really interesting for the second half, or whatever, last third of my career coming forward.
And for you, obviously, you've been in the general management functions, regionally responsible. You've been in sales. Is this all working up to eventually becoming a CEO of a business? Or for you, what's kind of the next steps or the aspirations for you moving forward?
Yeah, I've always assumed that I would be CEO of probably an automotive business, and there's many that are interesting. I think I also have a different perspective on work-life balance after coronavirus than I did before. Mm-hmm. And I would be very interested to do that if I felt like, again, I could lead in the right way and I could do it in a healthy way. I think there's a lot of work habits in our industry, probably in a lot of industries, that aren't so healthy. And I'm really committed to living a healthy, balanced life in the second half of my career as well. So if that comes, that's great. If it's the right opportunity, I think that would be really fun to do. I think I have the skills to do that. And if it's more on advisory roles and helping out on boards and mentoring and so forth, then that's also very fulfilling to me as well. And can be done together with a senior level executive job without being a CEO of a company. So we'll see how it goes. I'm much less connected to the outcome or having a specific outcome in mind, and more process oriented in what it is that I feel like I can really add value to people and business as a whole.
Okay, and you just mentioned it, work-life balance. How easily is that achieved? Because as you mentioned, you've been in China, you've been in Mexico, you've been in Korea. All aspects for the job, there's transformation from the engineering side to the sales side you've been involved in. So pre-COVID then, how was it a case of you could take a step back and get that balance, or is it pretty difficult being a leading executive?
Yeah, I mean, I think it is difficult because all the trappings, and it's so compelling. As we said, the industry is so exciting and there's so much going on. It's very compelling. So it's difficult to step back from, and there's always more to do.
Yeah.
And I think that it's the lesson that I've really learned this year that I think is really important for everybody to keep in mind is I am not my work. There's more to Art Blanchford than my career and my title and what I accomplish in my working hours.
Mm-hmm.
I was listening to this Disney executive recently, and he said one of his pillars that he always introduces to his new team is you work to live, not live to work.
Yeah.
Right. And I think that's something that I just learned this year. And I think that's really important. And I think that mindset, if you have that mindset, then even if you're putting in a fair amount of hours, there will be times when it's out of balance. I even like to think more about flow than balance, because being balanced is static, right? There'll be times when it's really intense this way. There'll be times of rest period, so it's more about flow and trying to stay in the flow all the time instead of being too heavy. So that means you take care of your sleep, right? I mean, I heard a great Dr. Elizabeth Stanley recently talking about how do you manage more stress. She works a lot with veterans. She's a veteran herself, but she talked about sleep is the first thing. Nutrition is the second thing. Exercise is the third thing. Reflection and meditation is the fourth thing. And social connections is the fifth thing. So if you take care of those 5 things, as I talked about at the beginning, that, the well-being of the individual, you take care of those things, then I think, you can manage whatever the cycle is in a much healthier way. And those social relationships, obviously, if you have a family, it starts there and making sure those are really well taken care of. I have a much better relationship with my kids now than I had before COVID. Mm-hmm. And it was good already. And I already had boundaries about how much I would travel. I had agreements with my family about how much I would travel, but I would do really crazy things to try to fit those agreements. I would leave on a Sunday night to go to China, land on Tuesday morning, 5 o'clock. So 2 nights on the plane, right? Going straight over LA and then to China, and land and go straight to work a day, go to bed one night, work the next day, and fly back 2 nights.
Yeah.
To be home to keep my agreement. And that's not smart. And I mean, eventually the human body wears out treating it like that for 25 years. So I'm focusing on Elizabeth Stanley's 5 metrics here as a basis. Mm-hmm. And then I think with that, making good decisions with a clear headed and with that foundation, then, okay, whatever's next, then it maybe not completely in balance, but keep the focus on those 5 things. And then recognize when you need to put a ton of energy in the business for a while, when you can take a break, let some other people do it. That's another thing I noticed too in myself, and I suspect this could be the case for a lot of leaders, mm-hmm. is that I'm pretty good at things, but I know how good or not good at things I am, and I don't necessarily know that about somebody else on my team as well. Okay. So I'll step into areas because I think, well, I'm really good at that and it needs my attention, but that also blocks somebody else from having that opportunity. Mm-hmm. So by me feeling like I have to take up, and do as much as I can and support as much as I can and work as hard as I can, I may actually be taking opportunity from other people to grow, which is the opposite of what I want to do in the second half of my career. So that's another thing I'm watching really carefully. If you look at the Parthenon, there's a lot of pillars. Mm-hmm. Only a few of them bear weight. And I used to be proud to say, hey, I'm the one bearing the weight. Yeah. But that may not be so smart, especially if I burn myself out. And how can I help to make sure the weight is evenly distributed and other people have a chance to bear weight and grow as well? And that's more of the focus in the second half.
And how hard has it been to be able to shift that and delegate that if you know you can do it yourself, to be able to give that influence that autonomy to other people? Was that harder in the start of your career compared to now, or?
It's definitely harder in the start than it is now, definitely. And I think it's still hard to do because it's what I'm used to doing. I've got decades of doing it that way, and it's immediately gratifying to do it that way. It's longer term gratifying to see the growth in others or to see the balance in my own life. So it's longer term gratifying to do it in a different way, to help others grow instead of sort of jumping and doing it myself. And I think that's one of the biggest things that I'm learning right now. But I think it's a very good lesson. I really think, to be blunt, the track that I was on up until this year, I was on the track to have a bad last third of life. I was working too hard, doing too much, heading for a serious burnout.
Okay.
And with COVID coming now, and with the reflection that I've had this year, I really feel like now I'm on the track to a good second half instead of a bad last third, to put it bluntly. So I think it's no less than that. I think it's nothing less than that that's at stake, is that our own health and well-being and relationships has to come first. And that's been a tough lesson for me. And it starts with realizing that I'm not my work, that there's a lot more to me than my job and my reputation at work, and that I don't have to be, and it sounds maybe even arrogant to say that, but I don't have to be Superman, right? One of my professors in college nicknamed me Superman, and that sort of stuck my whole life. But it's actually, and I used to be proud of that, but I'm not anymore. That's not something, I don't want to be Superman. I want to be human, right? Human, not Superman. So, and it's a lot more opportunity for a lot more fun and a lot more connection in that way than sort of feeling alone and like I'm doing it all by myself, which is not, it's sort of arrogant actually to think that way, but that's the way I felt a lot. And I wouldn't be surprised if a lot of other people feel that way too. I don't know.
Okay. And in terms of individuals stepping into the industry that aspire to be where you are, or even executive in the industry now, they're looking to get where you are, what kind of advice would you give to someone starting out, as well as someone that's in the middle of their career wanting to progress?
Yeah, I mean, I think there's several pieces that jump to mind. First is take care of yourself in the way that I talked about, right? Take care of your own health and well-being. Realize as important as work is, it's not who you are. It's not the only thing in life. So to keep it in check, so you won't put unnecessary pressure on yourself. That's the first thing. Second thing is I have a real passion for the customer, and especially in this industry. I mean, if you think about whether you're in the OEM or in a supplier, I mean, if you're in GM, they all say everything begins and ends with the customer, right? So I have a couple things that I like to say about that. One is everything that I have that money can buy, everything you have that money can buy comes from your customer, right? They've literally put the shirt on your back and the food on your family's table. And we need to give them that honor and that respect for that position. So I think to have a very strong customer focus. I love what Goran Korstad said, who is the head of IKEA. He said, there's only two jobs in every organization: to serve the customer or serve somebody who serves the customer. And that's it, right? So I think take care of yourself, have a balanced perspective of life, focus really hard on the customer, and be willing to put in some crazy hours and work times as well, with understanding the other foundation that comes first. But we want to be flexible, being open to new experiences, be capable of holding the perspective of old school automotive, running everything in series, and new school tech, running everything at the same time in parallel with rapid agile development. Being able to hold both of those, which comes back to take care of yourself first, so you can manage this dichotomy which we're in as an industry. And I think having some real passion for what it is that you do. If it's really about, if you feel like electrification is the thing, to put your emphasis there. If you feel like it's autonomy that really can make a difference on the planet and you're really excited about, put your energy there, right? If you feel like it's transportation, I don't think I would have made it near as far in this industry if I didn't really have a passion for cars and love the industry itself. I mean, I'm reading car magazines in my off time because that's what's interesting to me. Right. So I think to really focus on where your passions bring you as well is also going to carry you a long way. And then be really open to new experiences. Go live overseas and see what that's like. Live in a different culture. I know the world feels like it's getting a lot bigger again today with the populism that we have going as a whole, and with COVID for sure. That stuff will pass, and then be open to other cultures. That's one thing that's great about the automotive industry. It's very global. And I've had tremendously rich experiences living and traveling all over the world, and learning to speak languages, et cetera, that I never really imagined I would have when I was in high school, for sure.
Okay. And then a big question then, who's inspired you throughout your career? Who have you looked up to?
Oh yeah, that's a good question. I mean, when I think about my, in terms of sort of my heroes or the people that have really gotten a lot of value or inspiration from, they're not in the industry. There are some that are in the industry as well, but it's Og Mandino, who's an author, really incredible author, and I had the pleasure to know before he passed away a decade ago. Great guy. Tony Robbins. A lot of people know Tony Robbins. I've done a ton of work with Tony Robbins, know him personally, and has been a great inspiration to me. Stephen Covey, who I also got to know before he died as well a while back. But Autoliv, we did a lot of work with the Covey organization, and Stephen Covey, also outstanding author and human and thinker, and what matters most. Inside the industry, there's my main mentor growing up in Autoliv was a gentleman named Gustav Selsing.
Okay.
Who was president of Autoliv North America when I hired there in 1995. Mm-hmm. And he had this passion for the customer that was incredibly strong, and a great understanding of human nature. And those two things, and a great belief in human beings as well. I mean, he gave me stuff that I probably had no business having at the age I had it. But and then he would mentor me through. I could be really transparent with him, which I really appreciate. I could ask him a lot of stupid questions, right? So that was really great. And I've been lucky to have quite a few bosses that I felt like I could go to battle for, right? That's the way I always thought, is this somebody I'll follow into battle? And I've been lucky to have quite a few bosses like that along the way. And then there's other guys that are just inspiring the industry, right? Fred Bauer, Gentex, right? I've had the pleasure of knowing him quite a bit and seeing how the childlike enthusiasm that he brings to the business, mm-hmm. and the great technology and the great benefit he's made to the millions and millions of people through the technology, and also tens of thousands through his company that he's built up, right, is really inspiring to me. So there's been many people along the way that I've been blessed to interact with and had examples from.
Okay, well, more of a double-barrel question, should I say, Art. In terms of you now, what do you want the legacy of Art Blanchford to look like, and what do you want to be remembered for?
I mean, I think it comes back to a little bit like where I want to go in the next phase of my career, let's say. Mm-hmm. I want to be remembered for treating people right, taking on the hard tasks and doing them together as a team with joy and commitment, and creating some really great results, but with people first, right? Running the business through the people, not running the people through the business, right? The first engagement is with the people, and what can I do and make a difference in their lives? I shared a story yesterday with this group that I was speaking to. When I was leaving China, mm-hmm. I had a going away party, which was a really, really sweet event. It was really, really wonderful. And this little Chinese young lady came up and hugged my neck and said, "Thanks for saving my life." I'd never met her before.
Yeah.
So I thought, what is she talking about? So she said, I know you don't know me, but I'm the wife of someone who works for you.
Okay.
And since you've been his boss, our home life is better. He's a better husband. He's a better father. We have better conversations. Mm-hmm. To me, if I could take that and spread it 1,000 times or 1,000,000 times, that would be the legacy that I would want to be remembered for.
Yeah.
And I knew her husband very, very well. And I had done a lot of work with him. And he was a great member of the team. And he was very, maybe abrasive in the beginning, and very much a team player in the end of that time. And apparently that made a big difference at home too. And so the power of business to do good on a human level is what I would like to be remembered for.
Okay, perfect. Well, Art, it's been a pleasure speaking with you. Thank you so much for your time. And I look forward to our next follow-up.
Thanks very much. Talk to you soon.
Bye.